Situation with US President Donald Trump and American foreign policy, it's quite interesting, and we are speaking about that every single day. But one element is very important, foreign policy. And someone who knows US foreign policy for decades is Ambassador John Bolton, who joins me now from Washington. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Program N1.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Ambassador, let me start with last Friday. US President got the really powerful but the rare slap from Supreme Court on his one of the most important elements in foreign policy, and that's the tariffs. How do you see this situation and how this will impact a foreign policy of the United States?
Well, this is a very important decision. Even though there are other provisions in the trade laws of the United States that allow Trump to impose some tariffs, they're very different than the sweeping authority that he claimed to have, in which the Supreme Court rejected on Friday. So he will try other ways to accomplish whatever his objectives are, but his discretion will be considerably more limited. His ability to impose these tariffs will be dispersed, and things will look very different, which I think will be good for the U.S. economy. There are a lot of things we still don't know. But now Trump will simply not be able to say, well, I don't like the way the president of Switzerland behaves, so the tariff on Switzerland will not be 30%, it'll be 39%. All of that is out the window now. And I think for responsible friends and trading partners of the United States, this is a good opportunity to try to negotiate more realistic tariff limits and hopefully overall get the tariffs lower.
Mr. Ambassador, one of also important elements in his foreign policy is Ukraine. We are approaching a 4th anniversary. He said at the start of second term, I'm going to pick up a phone, make one phone call, and this war will be end in 24 hours. He didn't succeed to do that.
Right. Well, it was never realistic to think he was going to do it, and it remains, I think, unlikely that the negotiations that are proceeding now are going to result in a ceasefire. The fact is, as you say, after 4 years now, with the anniversary on the 24th, the West has failed to have a strategy for how to defeat Russia. When Biden was president, the approach was to make sure that Ukraine didn't lose, but it was not a strategic reaction to the unprovoked aggression. And indeed, much of Biden's policy was based on the fear of a wider war, which Putin threatened, but really didn't have the capacity to do. Trump's approach is very different. Number one, he doesn't have a strategy. He doesn't deal in policy the way we normally understand that. He looks at Ukraine as a chance to win the Nobel Peace Prize for somehow or another crafting a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. He counted, I think, when he was saying during the 2024 campaign that he could resolve the crisis in 24 hours, he was counting on his friend Vladimir Putin to make some concessions, and he would find a way to make a deal. I think Putin has done exactly the opposite. He's used his KGB training very effectively on Trump. He's identified his weaknesses. He's played on them. And Putin believes he has now put Russia in a very strong position. So I don't think there's really much of a chance for these negotiations that are currently underway to succeed. I think the prospect, unfortunately, is the war will grind on because Putin is being told by his generals that the war of attrition that Russia is waging against Ukraine is close to success, close to breaking the Ukrainian resistance, which would be a big victory for Russia if it happened.
Mr. Ambassador, you spend a lot of time in negotiations of different kinds, but you're also known in world arena that you are one of the Iranian hawks. You advocated for action against Iran for a long, long time. Can this negotiating quote-unquote team assembled of Witkoff and Kushner do anything? Because yesterday Witkoff said that both of them are surprised that the regime didn't collapse when they put the USS Abraham Lincoln and other elements in front of them, forgetting that these guys are 40 years under sanctions and pressures.
Right. Well, Witkoff and Kushner are more Secretary of State than Marco Rubio is. That's part of the problem. They don't really understand what's at stake between Russia and Ukraine. They don't understand what's at stake between Iran and the rest of the world. And I don't think their efforts at negotiation with Iran have any more chance of success than the ones over Russia, Ukraine. Trump's in a very difficult position. During the protest in Iran in January, he drew a red line to the Ayatollahs. He said, don't kill any of the protesters, which they then proceeded to do in unbelievable numbers, tens of thousands by the best estimates, unfortunately, because the Iranian regime has never shown any indication it's prepared to give up its quest for nuclear weapons. So having drawn a red line, having seen the negotiations going nowhere, Trump has to decide whether he'll use force at a minimum to vindicate the red line and not look like Barack Obama, who drew a red line on chemical weapons in Syria. Whether Trump is prepared to go beyond that in using force, I don't think he knows yet. But I do believe, and I believe this for a long time, the only real answer to the Iranian threat, not just in the nuclear realm, but in the realm of support for international terrorism, is to get rid of the regime of the Ayatollahs.
Mr. Ambassador, if he gets rid of Ali Khamenei as he did with Maduro, but keeps the rest of the regime in, could that just mean that we get the same old after one after another?
Right. Look, it was a good thing to get rid of Maduro in Venezuela, and a mistake to leave the rest of the authoritarian criminals that were part of Maduro's regime in power. And I think, unfortunately, the democratic opposition in Venezuela has been tossed to the side, and it's going to work out badly for everybody except the regime itself. Likewise, in Iran, it's not just the Ayatollahs, it's not just the supreme leader Khamenei, it's the Revolutionary Guard and the instruments of state power that protect the revolution. I think the regime itself has never been weaker since it took power in 1979. I think all across the country, you can see it in the demonstrations at the funerals of the people massacred by the regime last month. In demonstrations at the opening of the new university and school terms that we've seen just in the past few days, this regime is much weaker than it appears. And if Trump would get together with the opposition, work on a common plan, I think U.S. military strikes would have a significant destabilizing effect on the regime, and we could see it crumble.
Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you about the rest of the Middle East region, because he formed so-called Board of Peace and assembled some countries over there. But his ambassador, and you know him very well, Mike Huckabee, is making him a lot of problems with his comments, which are basically saying we want to see a great Israel on the territory of the Middle East. And Arab and Muslim countries have reacted very strongly about that.
Yeah, but look, on the Board of Peace first, it is going nowhere. This is an idea that originated with plans for the Gaza Strip. Those plans aren't going anywhere either until Hamas disarms and demilitarizes. And so far, even though all Israeli hostages have now been returned, everything we see in Gaza indicates Hamas is going to struggle to not just to survive, but to become dominant there once again. So until that changes, until there's a fundamental shift in the facts on the grounds in Gaza, the Board of Peace will have no role there. And to say, well, based on their lack of success in Gaza, they'll have a role in Ukraine, they'll have a role with Iran or other crises is just daydreaming. This is simply another aspect of Trump's public relations campaign to get a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, people find it hard to believe that Trump is actually driven by this desire to get the Nobel Peace Prize as opposed to American national security, but that's the reality. What Trump worries about is not national security strategy. He worries about what's good for Donald Trump.
Mr. Ambassador, I spoke with you after you finished your term and work for him, and after your book was published. And in your book, you spoke a lot about NATO relations and his attitude towards allies. But now these things with Greenland and attacks on allies, how do you see that situation?
Well, I don't think there's any chance that the United States is going to attack Greenland. I think this is just Trump trying to exaggerate for effect and believing that people will give him whatever he demands. There's a very easy way to resolve our legitimate security concerns in the Arctic Ocean, not just in Greenland, but Canada, Alaska, Norway, really for the entire NATO alliance, because of Chinese and Russian activities in the Arctic that threaten everyone else. All this was clear during Trump's first term. I explained to him about the bilateral treaty with Denmark called the Defense of Greenland Treaty from 1951. And then I left the administration and nothing more seemed to happen. But I think Trump's behavior is not only unnecessary to deal with Greenland, it's causing enormous damage in the NATO alliance. And it's something really of very grave concern. It's something the Russians tried to do during the Cold War, divide Europe from the United States. One reason they lost the Cold War is that they failed to divide NATO. We certainly shouldn't be doing their work for them today.
Mr. Ambassador, how do you saw speech of Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference? Because it looked like more ideological than security and cooperation and military elements. He was speaking more about migrants and changing the social fabric of societies in Europe than about how to mend those differences that are experienced at the moment.
Well, I think many people have commented that in substance, what Rubio said wasn't too much different than what J.D. Vance said last year, but the tone was very different, much friendlier, much more the way one ally talks to another. I think that's right. But it wasn't really the people at the conference who were Rubio's audience. All senior officials in a Trump administration only have a one-person audience, and it's Donald Trump. And Rubio is a good enough politician to know that if he wants to run for president in 2028, he needs Trump to be on his side, or at least willing to accept him. And it's clear he will not cross him in office. And that's what that speech in Munich represented.
Mr. Ambassador, what if in November Democrats win at least one house of Congress? How difficult that will be for Trump, not only on domestic scene, but also on foreign affairs scene?
Well, under our Constitution, the power of the president in international affairs is very, very significant. And it's often said in a president's second term, and especially the last 2 years of his second term, that the presidents turn to international affairs because they have more leeway. Now, I think if the Democrats take at least the House of Representatives, which seems likely, and perhaps the Senate, they're not going to allow Trump to behave unfettered internationally. They're going to try and rein him in. They and everybody else will also be thinking about the 2028 presidential election. There will be candidates for the Democratic nomination in the Senate and possibly the House. So politics will dominate the last 2 years of Trump's term no matter what. And it's a reflection that at this point, America is a pretty divided country, and until there's some event that tilts decidedly one way or the other.
And let me ask you for the end of this conversation, I'm not going to ask you about your case, which DOJ is taking against you. But what we saw in the last couple of weeks is that the DOJ has arrested several journalists for doing their job. We know that the U.S. administrations were always unsatisfied how reporters are reporting about their work. But this was a step further than previous administration, just grumbling and being unsatisfied with their work. How do you see this situation?
Well, I think it's indicative that Trump is trying to engage in a campaign of retribution against his enemies or people who disagree with him. His criticism of the Supreme Court last Friday on the tariff decision was unprecedented in American history for the personal attacks that he made against the justices. And Trump's view typically is, I'm going to sue somebody, and it doesn't even matter ultimately if I lose in court. If I can make trouble for them and require them to go through the judicial process, that alone is a win for me. It may intimidate others from doing what the targets of those other suits have done. So I think it's a big mistake. It's not what the First Amendment intends, but I think Trump really is still looking after one thing, and that's how does it affect him personally.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so very much for your time and for this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to do it.